Hey, all Sean Maloney, Digital Business Masters, another weekly call, all things blockchain, all things digital business. We're here to make sure that we provide enough repetition, enough reliability, enough education, and enough motivation, okay? To make sure you're successful in anything, you need all those things. And as a professional coach, I like to think that that is what I can offer because we're simply helping people do what we've done. That's all we're doing. All right, and we're continually finding ways to make sure we understand what the most valuable information in the world can provide ordinary people, especially at the latter end of the fourth turning. And it's a case of making sure that you understand what that is, because if you've already achieved that, well done. If you're working through it, keep going. But most of all, if you're looking to guide others, and that often manifests as people thinking about children and grandchildren, about where the world's headed, right? It's pretty clear where the world's headed. So this is the most valuable information in the world. And then, of course, we need to take that into practical steps. So you can't just keep watching media and listening to politicians and bankers and YouTube, wherever you get your information from these days, and just be a passive observer. You've got to go and do something with the information. That's what we talk about in part two. If you're here on YouTube, hit the like, smash the bell. Really appreciate you being here, and make sure that you register below to be able to access part two inside the sanctity of the Academy itself. It's very powerful information, and we have to put it behind some level of value. We're not here to give you any advice, okay? Whatever you decide to do as a grown adult has been your business since you were 18 years of age. Nothing's changed. But maybe what has changed in this past decade or so, or certainly since COVID, has been the need for people to be much, much more aware of their own responsibility and their own power. The ability you have. Don't ride. You know, if you've been 100% reliant on bosses, banks and governments most of your adult life, then you've been riding. You've got to look at it in a very different way, especially as we go into this new era and become an owner, a driver, a person of responsibility, someone who's totally attuned to what it is to be able to take advantage of the huge opportunities that exist in this world now, if people care to look and get educated. Where do we get our drive and enthusiasm to keep doing this every single week for the most of the last decade? Where has all that come from? Well, it comes from us realizing since 2008, actually, and we probably had an idea of this before 2008, because as an employer, you know, a person responsible for other people in business, even when we were trying to bring through apprenticeships and we were trying to install stock buybacks and, you know, initiatives that allowed people to have delayed gratification, there was resistance, because the mindset of the average person is to do what they need to do today, to this week, this month, and just keep doing that month over month, hoping that that will give them enough to make a living. In other words, getting by. Now, maybe, arguably, up until the early part of this century, that was possible, because the effects of what is the fiat system and the debasement of fiat currency was just about balanced. But after 2008, that completely changed. Radically changed. So unless you're out there earning more income, in other words, a higher wage level, or if you're doing multiple jobs, unless you're that type of person, you've been going backwards. And that's because it's not prices going up, it's the purchasing power of the fiat currency you're using to buy liabilities that's going down. The sooner you understand this, and certainly the core people inside DBM understand this by now, the sooner you understand this, the sooner you can do something about it. And what do you do? Well, you become disciplined and educated enough and responsible enough to understand that you can take proportions of that devaluing fiat currency and reallocate it to other things that create accretion, that are appreciative. And then you take that, manifests often as equity, to fund liabilities through your balance sheet, just like any professional business has done since 1600s. It's not difficult, but as an employee, as someone who's come through the system and be taught to be part of the system, you're going to see that as a complete revelation. And that's the reason 5 years ago, nearly 6 years ago now, we decided to set up an academy dedicated to this proportion, this end of the fourth turning. This is what's behind it all, right? So the structure's there. It's very, very successful. It works if you work. It's the only way I can put it. And a lot of that is down to skill and mindset, right? So to help that along, we have various tools and abilities for people to get plugged into all sorts of different things. I'll show you in a minute. People then ask us, okay, well, that's all fine and dandy, but what does that look like in real life? What does it look like in real life? Well, quite hopefully, obviously, it means converting debased currency, fiat currency, to sound money. Now, if you don't understand the difference between currency and money, then you're never going to understand the rest of this session. So you need to go back and go to the Where to Start section of the Academy, watch all the content, all the videos, all the information, all the podcasts that explain very clearly, and there are lots of books you can read as well, that explains very clearly that fundamental truth. And once you get that, and you understand technology, such as proof of work, such as blockchain, such as immutable energy, then you start to appreciate why many people in the DBM Academy over many years have been accumulating Bitcoin. And moreover, you'll start to understand why now bosses, banks, and governments are accumulating Bitcoin. And there's only one net result of that. Despite the noise, despite the turmoil, despite everything we'll talk about in macro and geopolitics in this call today, you'll realize that nothing stops this train. So all we've done over the past decade is accumulate to put ourselves on the front foot in terms of sound money and owning monetary energy distributed on a global balance sheet that's got nothing to do with governments, nothing to do with banks, nothing to do with bosses. It's got to do with people who understand how to own something that is fixed in supply and unlimited in demand. And we take advantage of that year over year, on average, 68% per year CAGR. On average, since 2014, right? Sorry, since 2009, 14 years. Right? So that's the first step. Then, as you get more sophisticated, you figure out that, okay, well, you can't run a long-term successful business just off a balance sheet. Right? You can't do it. Right? It's like waiting for your house to appreciate. It's either going to take you decades, or when you do get to the point where you want to cash in appreciation, there's going to be no buyers, right? Or the buyers aren't there enough to reach the level you expected. That's impossible in business. What you have to do is complement your business with a P&L and create what's called yield. Broadly speaking, in simple terms, you're creating yield. You're taking something from value of this to something of value of that. And in that cycle, you're taking small amounts of incremental benefit as time passes. Now, that's a skill. Big time is that a skill, especially in this space, right? We cover 14 different industries in DBM these days because of this reason, because things move around and they don't always go the way you want them to do. But show me any business that does. Suppliers, regulation, policy, employees, materials, market, value propositions. Everything changes in business. That's why you're continually evolving. It's no different here. Sorry to burst your bubble, but there is no free lunch. So to constantly find ways, we'll talk about in part 2, in which we're creating ongoing cash flow is absolutely a skill. And it takes huge amounts of fortitude that most people just haven't got, frankly. But hopefully, when we stick together the way we do it at the DBM Academy, we find the people who do want to push through, right? That's just in the smart contract world. That's just when you're dealing with smart contracts on USDT stablecoins built from equity over to yield. It's even more interesting and arguably complex when you decide to take that philosophy across to altcoin markets, because then you're dealing with equity and yield in one ecosystem. And that is something that even in 2025 is still just too much of a step for people to understand, let alone be able to manage. It's okay. It's okay, because it will normalize for all the reasons that we understand with things like the fourth turning and what's going on in the global economic systems of the world. All right, we're just front runners. We front run Bitcoin, we front run smart contracts and USDT stablecoins, and now we're front running altcoins. We just front run. That's what we do, right? And we find a way always. Obviously, that is a big thing. That is a task that isn't like, drop shipping, e-commerce, all the stuff that you'll find that people do gig economy stuff with. You know what I mean? Like just churning middlemen. What we do is not that. We push people right to their limits. We take people to places that they never expected to go. That's what we do. That's the purpose of it. It's like a financial gym. It will push you to a point and you'll go, oh, I can run a half a marathon. Oh, I can run a marathon. But it takes a certain type of person. There's no question about that. It is why we distill now much more than we ever did before, because it's not numbers anymore, it's quality over quantity. And part of the ways we've learned to distill is to use AI. So now we have all the intellectual property that we've developed and all the experience and knowledge and awareness and contacts and relationships and proof of concepts that we've created over the past decade. And we've distilled them into one neat Wealth Builder Series mechanism. Basically, it's a 12-month program. We've made it as accessible as possible. And the only way we've been able to do that is by utilizing AI. So we're in module 4 of the 12-month module process. It doesn't matter when you start, it's all evergreen. It just rolls and rolls and rolls and rolls. It'll keep going and going and going and going. And all we do is enhance and enhance and enhance as the years and months roll by. So if you're not plugged into this, then you're missing a trick. So make sure you are, and make sure you keep up, and you will be successful. Where's that confidence come from? Well, because frankly, everything in the Wealth Builder series is just a distilled position of everything we've already been doing for most of the past decade. And most of what we've been doing for most of the last decade, which is where we get our confidence from and our ability and capability from, is because we've been through everything that can possibly be thrown at us in the digital business arena. That's why we're digital business masters, because nothing has fazed us, not much anyway. The whole idea is that we've taken a concept that we understood as early as 2010 and gone through iteration after iteration after iteration after iteration of what that looks like. And we're still doing that, as you'll hear in part 2. The whole idea is that this chart shows you what we've been through just on the price of Bitcoin. And those of you in the academy that have been with us for many years and you've been through this, you know what I'm talking about. Those of you who are looking on the edges and just trying to make a bit of extra money or trying to get rich quick, forget it, right? You've got to go and get your mindset right, and then you've got to get the skills. You might not like it. You might feel uncomfortable. You might be busting comfort zones. You might keep convincing yourself it's not for you. You might keep procrastinating. You might keep saying, I can't do it, but you can. And then one thing you can do, every human being can do, even though it's becoming a bit of a lost art, I don't know why, but we've brought us some soft kids. The whole idea is you've got to give people resilience. You've got to give people a really focused, hard-edged approach to how to be a success, whatever success means in your existence. So the Bitcoin price tells you all you need to know, right? And I keep this slide up every week because we do get a lot of it coming to us, especially with new people coming in. They say, oh, Bitcoin's fallen 30%. I got involved early 2025 and mid 2025, and I bought up at 118 and 126, and now Bitcoin's down at 90. And it's yeah, and did you not listen to us when we were talking to you about this chart? Right? That is one of the biggest revelations. And the whole idea is not to be destined to fortune, not just to think this is a done deal. It's to understand fundamentally what proof of work is. Don't even think about price. Don't try and buy success. Stop trying to speculate. Stop trying to get rich quick. Just accumulate on the basis of a pure understanding of what proof of work is. And you'll be absolutely fine. Don't price watch, just dollar cost average. Take price dips as a blessing and then move on to the next phase. That's what it's all about. Now, we put up with this all the way through the early years pre-2024. From 2009, when Bitcoin was born, to 2024. All the way now is a different world. It's got to be said, because there's a lot more sophisticated manipulation now at play. Back here, it was retail manipulation, cowboys, people, trying to get things moving, but it was arguably a lot tougher than it is now. Because now you've got the same type of shenanigans going on. Just accept that. That's just the way it is. You've been living in that world anyway since 1971. So what's changed? But now you've got the ability of self-custody. You've got the ability to take ownership of something that nobody can possibly ever have, and nobody can take away from you if you understand how to manage security, right? And that's a big part of what we're doing in the Wealth Builder series, by the way. Security is a big week on that particular routine. So all we know is we've got growth because now we can see adoption. And you'll get the 2-bit YouTubers, you'll get the clickbaiters, you'll get the mass media, you'll get your friend, you'll get your brother-in-law, all with the same discussion points that we've had over the past decade. Oh, it's manipulated, it's been invented. You've got all these people involved with it. Just tell them to get on the bloody bike, right? If they don't have the time or the ability to do what you've done and understand what they're dealing with here, then they are not worth your time. Simple as that. Send them away. It's crazy, but that's the world. That's what people do, especially in this age of communication. Right. So it's all very well me saying that. It's all very well me having an absolute position as a Bitcoin maxi and someone who's done very well over the years from this type of approach. But that's not good enough. What we also need to do is keep a very, very, very close eye on what's happening geopolitically, on what's happening on the macro level of the world that is mainly influencing what is going on with Bitcoin particularly, but it also has a very big responsibility in our business strategies and the way that we look at general crypto, right? General cryptography, general blockchain, general movement of financial rails on, as I say, as we come to this at the last cycle of this fourth turning. It's about looking at what's going on to make sure that you're not run over, let's say, more run over than you've already been by the fiat system. The fiat system is unlikely to go anywhere in our lifetimes, but it's very much likely to adjust in such a way that those of us who are astute enough and cute enough and aware enough to be on the front foot with the change, which manifests mainly as Bitcoin, you're able to be in control. And that's really all this is about. All right. Now, we've had a big tailwind hit us. Okay. You can't map this out. You can't plan for it. It's incredibly difficult. It all hinged, a lot of it actually hinged, at least in perception, on a change of government in the US in late 2024. At least that's the perception, right? But then when you do dig behind the scenes, you realize that there's a lot more going on in terms of how the banks run the world, not the governments. We all know that at this level these days. It doesn't matter. All that does matter is that as long as you're working your business in a way that's taking advantage of the next cycle, that's a part of the super cycle, right? And we've already been through 3 of them in our lifetimes, then you're able to be on the front foot this time around. So we judge it and we monitor it. And I know people can't do this every single day for themselves because you're busy, you're doing what you do, you're possibly even still fiat mining. But the whole idea is that we are full-time and we get the chance to sit down, absorb. And one of the best things I ever did personally, just on that point, was find a way to breathe. To find a way to rise so far above the canopy that you get a chance to see and therefore have a much better opportunity to be able to get ahead than you would if you were sat in commuter traffic every day, sat, in a cubicle or on a machine every day, sat, owning a job every day as you would as a self-employed person. It's incredibly difficult, even more than having a job. As you're running a business that's self-employed, you find it very difficult to get time, right? And one of the best things that I ever did was to figure out that time is more valuable than anything else. And part of my time, I'll go through these top line pieces of macro data and geopolitical data to try and frame week over week over week over week a trajectory. And the more we do this, we've actually done this now for a solid just over 12 months at this particular incarnation of the strategy call. The more it vindicates and proves to us that if you want to predict the future, you just take a bearing of where you are today and just look backwards. History really does rhyme. And that gives you such an empowered position that we've experienced just this last couple of weeks, actually, as we observe what's going on with the Federal Reserve. AKA, the Federal Reserve and ours has actually started now, it started last week, I've now started buying back a record 45 billion in debt every month. Right, it's actually already started, and it'll kick in officially from January. Now, that's called quantitative easing. And this is a great example. You know, who heard of quantitative easing before 2009? Nobody, right? However, if you understand what quantitative easing is, you'll realize that quantitative easing has actually been around since the 90s. They just called it something different, right? We've had 4 lots of quantitative easing up until 2020, right? And then they called it something slightly different, and now they've called it something slightly different again. Reserve management is what they're calling it now, right? It's quantitative easing. It just means that the central banks are given the free rein to purchase printed certificates from the governments to justify issuance of more currency into the economy. That's what it basically means, aka liquidity. And while those in normal world, right, which is 95% of people, have been completely steamrolled by that, especially since 2008. In other words, death by 1,000 cuts through hidden inflation, and the fact that debasement of the currencies meant that they have a perception of increased price and also shrinkflation. Most people who are barely getting by and can't get pricing, wage increases, some people are working 3 or 4 jobs, but a bigger and bigger number of people are queuing up at food banks. That's the net result of it. Those of us who saw it, or at least had a feel for it over the last decade, have made huge amounts of money out of this concept of QE because we own assets. Now, it shouldn't be like that. But you have to sort yourself out before you can help anybody else. And that's the mantra of what we do at DBM, right? So lo and behold, not that we can know it's coming, not that we can say it's going to happen then, but we had a very, very good idea back in 2019, 2020, when they last did this, that they were going to do it again. And they will do it again and again and again, right? So that's the main thing. You own the assets underlying. Doesn't matter what asset it is, but some assets are more sensitive to this than others, right? Particularly Bitcoin and gold, because that is sound money, right? Everybody knows this. And behind the scenes, all the big institutions know this, right? And that's why do as the rich say, not as they do. Or do as the rich do, not as they say. One of which is Cantor Fitzgerald, a big, big player in this mechanism over the past few decades. And they've gone into bed with the 21. Capital 21, right? The Jack Mallers guy, you might have heard of him. Okay, there's a lot of debate going on at the minute about, you know, hardcore Bitcoiners getting in bed with hardcore TradFi establishments and everything else. You can't stop it. It is what it is, right? All you got to know is as long as you're in self-custody, with some of your assets being used in the system, well, no problem with that. We say that in part 2, right? But mainly should be self-custody. All the net effect of all this on a fixed supply is just that you get more and more and more and more demand for Bitcoin, right? That's why we know where Bitcoin's headed by 2030, because we can see it. And all you've got to do is own enough, right? Just in that cycle and be cute enough to know when it's time to shift, right? That's what we do. That's what we did with gold. Same thing, right? You move when you need to move, but you've got to be in the game to play the game, right? So now we have a Bitcoin treasury company trading on the New York Stock Exchange via Cantor Fitzgerald, right? So it's a start. We've got the same thing going on with Strategy. CFTC announces pilot program for Bitcoin to be used as collateral in derivatives markets. Now, again, CFTC, where they come from, right? For years and years and years, either asleep at the wheel, probably, or wrapped up in SEC chains so that they, if they did have the sense to do this for themselves, which they probably did, they're not stupid, they weren't able to, but now they are. Right, so it just brings more in. Now you're going to get 2 camps. I'll keep saying this over the next few months. You're going to get 2 camps. You're going to get a lot of people out there who are saying, no way, this shouldn't be happening. They're going to destroy Bitcoin. You know, the price manipulation, they're going to take out the vol and everything else. Okay, we'll be aware of it, but we've had all this before. So just stop talking unless you know what you're talking about. The other side, it's, well, actually, no. this is quite interesting because this is going to create a normalization of a new asset class into the fiscal, infrastructure. And those who have been astute enough to purchase Bitcoin below $100,000 are going to be very, very well off as we go into the next cycle. You've got to decide where you are. As ever, the truth is always somewhere in the middle, right? So try not to work either side of it. It's a bit like politics and religion. Try not to work either side of it. Try and work in the middle and try and stay away from these conspiracy people as much as you can. Billionaire Jack Dorsey said the internet will have a native currency and it will be Bitcoin. No shit. So we've known about this for some time. It's actually more sophisticated than this now, as we'll discover more in part 2. It's actually more about AI. It's actually much more about AI. This is why we need to be on our toes in using AI, not being abused by AI, the way that people have been abused by money. Don't be abused by money, use money. It's the same philosophy, just on a different rail. But when they collide together the way Jack Dorsey's talking about, it's quite something. Sailor says strategy will not issue preferred stocks in Japan to give Metaplanet a 12-month head start. If you heard this last week at the conference over in Abu Dhabi, if you've not watched that keynote speech, then make sure you do. It was Sailor and Metaplanet sat together on the same stage talking about how they're spearheading and pioneering this new era of Bitcoin treasury companies. Quite extraordinary. To say that at the end of 2025, I like to go back 2024, 2020, 2019, 2016, and just keep an eye on history and go, oh, well, blimey. If I'd have thought I'd be sat here at the end of 2026 saying there's two major, well, one's a technical company, one's a hotel company, suddenly becoming treasury companies on Bitcoin and completely reforming financial mechanisms in front of our eyes, I've said, no, it's not going to happen, but it is happening. And in fact, it already has. 230,000 Bitcoin drained from exchanges. Now, this is what we watch this closely. In our world, little old us world, we're not there with the TradFi people. We're down here in the DeFi stuff. Watching the normal exchanges drain themselves of Bitcoin very quickly, all right, tells you a lot with regards to price discovery and expectations as we go forward. Now, we've used that barometer a long time, along with the hash rate. Yeah, along with obviously price. We sort of balance each other. Again, new people inside the academy oftentimes, you don't often hear from them and that's when you know they're frightened, right? And when you get big price drops, especially if they're using leverage, they sort of freeze, right? What you should be doing is understanding this industry enough, not just to understand what proof of work and blockchain technology is about, but also understand what it is to be looking at the various barometers that tell you when to buy. All right. Fact is, you buy all the time, but you can buy more aggressively. Okay. So that's what's happening with the normal exchanges, let's say, that we're currently working with. Prospective, probable, likely, in fact, will be. Fed Chair Kevin Hassett says there is plenty of room for more interest rates cuts. And we said that this time last week before they did reduce by 25 basis points. We know where that's going, right? It's quite twee these days, but maybe 5 years ago, we'd keep a very close eye on Fed interest rates that had an effect on all other interest rates, obviously. And that would be a very easy way, along with the 4-year cycle, to predict, the ups and, the ups and downs. Bitcoin does that, but it does that, right, on the way up, right? You saw the chart earlier. Now, these days, the Fed interest rates cuts is a much smaller part, as is the halving rate, by the way, because of these much bigger entities at play. But it's still important, right? So if we are going to get more interest rates cuts, which is crazy, it's absolutely crazy that they're cutting interest rates at a time of so-called low inflation and non-damaging effect in economic affairs, right? There's no recessions, there's no issues, but they're still cutting rates, right? Because they've nothing else to do. This just shows the complicity of what we've been dealing with most of our lives. Michael Saylor says all US major banks have contacted him for Bitcoin advice. Fair enough, right? Who wouldn't contact him for advice? Revolut just announced that their 50 million users can now buy Bitcoin and withdraw to self-custody. And that's important. We're always looking for on-ramps and off-ramps and everything else. We'll talk about more of this in part 2 in terms of how you're able now to create lots of income through activity that you may not be aware of yet, outside of your job, outside of your business, and outside of your project of choice, you can get now very active in converting income and taking that through some rails that give you easy off ramps now. And Revolut is a way of doing that. I know that because I've just set one of my kids up with it over the weekend. So very, very interesting indeed. Strive sells 50 million in stock to buy more Bitcoin. All right, that's a classic strategy. Asset manager Strive just launched a 500 million preferred stock. So they're basically copying MicroStrategy strategy to buy more Bitcoin and grow to 7,500 Bitcoin positions. So Strive are just doing exactly what Meta Planet have done and what strategy has done. It's just more and more and more information, more and more evidence that this is becoming a stalwart, a normal thing inside traditional finance. PNC Private Bank, huge private bank, have partnered with Coinbase to launch its own Bitcoin trading. So in other words, you've got this reverse compatibility thing going on now. So Coinbase spearheaded a lot of this and pioneered a lot of this over the last decade, and now you're getting these big private institutions doing the same thing. We've been involved with this type of thing through companies like Endotech for a long, long time, right? We're very aware that the smaller private entities are moving quicker than the larger ones, and we've just taken advantage of it through thick and thin. You know, we've been pioneers as well, but now to watch everybody doing this just means you get more regulation, legislation, more adoption, and that just leads to the same thing, all boats rise, yeah? CZ says crypto could enter a super cycle as early as next year, driven by US politics, Fed easing and institutional adoption. Yeah, pretty broad thing to say, pretty obvious in many ways, but we'll see. There is a lot of manipulation, right? Always has been, always will be. And as I say, if you're going to work as close as you can to the money supply, just expect it to get rougher. But that's a good thing because you're seeing it in the month, the year that you're in. Most people are so far out from the center of the money supply, they just get slight ripples. But as the years go by, those ripples destroy the jetty, right? At least we get a chance to see it and build a new jetty. We move, right? That's what's basically happening as we sit here in 2020, going towards 2026. 90 billion, Coinbase just said more European countries will follow the Czech Republic and buy Bitcoin. They will inevitably. I mean, I could spend the whole session going through the disgraceful setup that's been put onto the Europeans through the EU experiment. It's absolutely disgraceful. And I mean that politically. It is terrible what's going on. And the whole idea now is that we're seeing peripheral countries. You know, there's even talk of, partnerships being stronger between the US and certain European countries than what they have as a relationship with Brussels. It's a real shakeout. It's an inevitability of a multipolar world, right? So it is what it is. And it's an inevitability of the states going more isolationist, moving NATO responsibility across to Europeans who don't know anything else other than to hollow out the middle class, sell the balance to BlackRock, and use those funds to buy weapons and create proxy wars. That has been the story of Europe, right? Forever. We had a quelling of it over the years, over the past, most of our lifetime, certainly since the 70s. But unfortunately, with the current bureaucrats in play, it's coming back with a vengeance. But luckily, we have now communication and people are informed and educated, and certainly the next generation are certainly not going to back these bureaucrats into these proxy wars. The best thing we can do is to be independent in our own households, own things that are immutable, own things that are available globally in any jurisdiction, and we vote with our feet, right? And Czech Republic have started that process, as have Italy, as have Poland, as have Hungary. So we'll see what happens as Germany and France are showing up for what they've become over the past 20 years. New ETF buying Bitcoin at night is coming. Now, this is interesting. It's a bit like, we again, what I've said to people for years is write to your MP, write to your local politician and ask them the question, why aren't you mining Bitcoin with stranded energy at 2:00 in the morning? And why haven't you taken that ability to mine Bitcoin with stranded energy onto a sovereign wealth fund that can be built up to such a way that it funds the NHS? Why are you not doing that? So write to your MP and do it. Why are you not doing that? Right? This is the whole process of what it takes for things to change. Right? You can't just shout from the sidelines. absorbing mass media. We have to make the change. Now, this is what's happening with this Bitcoin, the ETF night stuff. It's quite interesting. The US markets are closed and Bitcoin never closes. So the thing is a fallacy. So after dark ETF holdings are going through the system now, which just means more and more and more demand. In other words, more movement of the asset class, right? These people aren't stupid. They're going to take their pound of flesh for that. Of course they are. But on the overall, it creates a net positive. US bank regulators just said JP Morgan, Bank of America, and Citi could face fines for debanking Bitcoin and crypto firms. Well, there you go. So this will be another $30 million slap on the wrist, just like we've seen with all these centralized bloody hegemonic banks over the past 50 years, right? Here we go again, right? It won't stop them. You can't stop them. We know that. The only thing you can do is protect yourself from them. And that's exactly what we do with self-custody. Welcome back. Balance sheet expansion. Yeah, just touching again on what's happening with the Fed. Bitcoin managed to climb from 16,000 to 126,000 as the Fed reduced its balance sheet since 2021. Think about it. Bitcoin climbed from 16 grand back in the early 20s up to $126,000 in 2025, while the Fed reduced its balance sheet. Now the Fed is expanding its balance sheet with absolute vigor. All bets are off. That's what going back to what I said before, right? We've done this before. We did this with gold back in the second or third QE, right? If you go and track the gold charts, you'll see what I mean. It's the same thing, but Bitcoin does it so much faster, right? So much faster. And it's easy for us. It shouldn't be this easy, but it is, because all we do is track the probabilities of this type of brinkmanship. And the sad thing is that most people don't do that, and they get completely trampled as the effects of this money printing go into 2030. You'll be paying double in real terms a loaf of bread by 2030 that you are today. Right? And people's wages will not have kept up with that because of the debasement of fiat currency. If you own Bitcoin, for example, that loaf of bread will at least stay the same. Just go and track it for yourselves. Go and track Bitcoin. Go and price everything in Bitcoin and gold as well, but price everything in Bitcoin for the past decade, and then project that same debasement, that devaluation of 8% a year on fiat to 2030, and then track Bitcoin's projected price to that. And look how it balances. It's like a cross, right? I have a joke with my friends when I go out, and they go, "Mo, no price of Guinness, not in the city now. Price of Guinness £6.50, £7, yeah." And I can't shout too loud because I sound like a complete idiot, but occasionally I go, "No, that's all right, £3.50. They have no clue what I'm talking about because they don't listen. 1.7 trillion. Bank of America has just announced it will issue its own Bitcoin-backed credit. So again, bending the knee. Bank of America now, JB Diamond, blah, 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 blah. They're just now swooping in to make sure they keep up with the likes of Strategy, let alone not got taken over by them, which we'll see. A statue of Satoshi. Now, I had to properly verify this. I had to go and double check this, but it is actually true. A statue of Satoshi was placed in the NSC last week, basically because 21 Capital and Cantor Fitzgerald were ringing the bell, like they do at 9 o'clock on a New York morning, every morning. They rang the bell. So they basically had this statue of Satoshi. Have you seen it? Where if you look at it at an angle, you can see straight through it. If you look at it front on, it's like a proper, it's some clever metal statue. So bang in the middle of the NYSE, right? Go figure. Never thought we'd ever see that day, but here we are, right? Either way, keep them off your Bitcoin. Do not give them your Bitcoin. Political stuff, geopolitics. Proposed Philippine Strategic Reserve would buy 10,000 Bitcoin over 5 years. Okay, just another example. This is great. We should see this in African nations. We need to see this in sub-Saharan nations. We need to see this in the global south. We need to see what's happening in Bhutan, what's happening in El Salvador. We need to see this. As a Brit, me writing to my local MP, trying to get her to get a finger out of her backside to say, what don't you understand about stranded energy at 2 o'clock in the morning and the accumulation of mined Bitcoin on behalf of the people to create a sovereign wealth fund to pay for the NHS? What don't you understand about that? Well, she understands nothing about it. That's basically what's happening. But the Philippines Attel do or are starting to understand it. And these are some of the most deprived countries on the planet compared to the, what is it? Some crazy number, 8 billion people on the planet, and about 500 million have a Western lifestyle that we complain about as first world problems. Give me a freaking break, right? Obviously, people are going to want to migrate into what they can see now on the internet and their phones to see a perceived better lifestyle. Why do you think immigration is happening? What we need to do is go and help the world to rebalance the reissuance of wealth, obviously. So the Philippines are starting to do that. Good for them. CFTC posed outdated crypto guidance. Again, mainly SEC, but CFTC are doing it on the ground. It's officially withdrawn multiple staff advisories on digital assets, saying the market is now mature enough to be treated like traditional derivatives. No shit. Right? Again, they wouldn't have done this on their own. They're doing it out of vested interest. Doesn't matter as long as you're self-custody. In fact, in the same breath, CFTC shares said she's using Bitcoin and crypto personally. Right? Don't believe me, go and have a look. She said it on a freaking news channel, Fox News or something, right? We'll buy trillions. She's saying it will bring trillions into the US markets. Where were these people 5 years ago? They are so complicit. It is unbelievable. Argentina, central bank to consider allowing banks to offer Bitcoin services. Well, about time, Argentina. You've been crushed by Milton Friedman. You've been crushed by the IMF. You've been crushed by the fiat system on dollars. Where have you been? Paul Atkins, SEC governor, prioritizing innovation and embracing new technologies to enable this on future chain while continuing to protect investors. He's got to say that. But yeah, fair enough. What you've got your maxis, right? You've got your people who truly understand it, which is where we are. You've got your mid-ground people, right? Your Paul Atkins, right? Increasing the numbers of mid-ground people, right? Who are starting to grow across from the complete ignorant or complicit people. And the European Union is full of these people still, who do not fully understand the technology as an entity to create the difference, right? And while us over here might be a little bit biased and a little bit over-enthusiastic, we'll come down to the middle a bit, right? And we'll see it for what it is. And we'll take, there'll be a mixture going on between middle and where we are. But these people over here, which is the majority of the world, right? They need to cop themselves on. Don't wait for them. Do not wait for them because they're self-interested. Congress pressures SEC to approve Bitcoin into 401k. So this is a good example of this group of people over here. Some people call them the doomers, right? You've got your baby boomers. You got the doomers, right? The doomers are those people who, well, I'm all right, Jack. My house is worth this. I've ridden everything up since 1971. I thought I was getting wealthy mainly because of my ability to buy this and do that and be successful. And maybe you were, but the most of your success, Grandad, came from the fact that the next generation after you, the next generation after you, now the next generation after you, Gen Z, are placing huge amounts of energy into keeping the same standard, but they're getting less and less and less for it. But Grandad's still got it's pig through the python, right? It's the baby boomers and the older Gen Xers, people like me, right? You've got a lot of money tied up in there because God willing and fantastic, they're living longer. So they should be fantastic, but crying out loud, start to put some of that money to use. So the 401ks are a big part of this, right? A lot of when I go into my local city, every single month they put a new skyscraper up, right? And what these skyscrapers basically are hutches for under 35s. They're basically apartments, right? And you can't even buy these things. You have to rent them. And the pension companies are building them to put their grandchildren into hutches for like $2,000 a month, right? And then their grandchildren are out there scraping around trying to find and making a living in a call centre, which is pumping back into their grandparents' pension funds, for crying out loud, while their kids are thinking about whether they can have kids or whether they can save up to have a house or whether they can start pushing a dog in a pram, right? This is what's going on. And what we're now starting to see is that being shaken out a little bit. right? But again, it makes me feel uncomfortable saying out loud, but as an aware asset owner of sound money, the liquidity filters straight back into our hands, right? What we've got to do, in my opinion, is find ways to give that fortune back in a constructive way. And obviously it starts with our kids and grandkids. And you won't find my kids sat in a hen house in the middle of a city, scraping a living in a call centre, right? That's the first thing we've got to do, right? We'll talk more about that in part 2. Well, finally, Poland's parliament has officially approved Bitcoin and crypto regulations for presidential signatures, what I was talking about before, right? You're going to get this unraveling going on, and it has to start from the core up, right? Unfortunately, what's going on in Poland and Czech Republic and Italy, it's not actually coming from the people in that sense. They're not like us, right? We're driving it up from our fundamental being up. What these countries have got, they've got contrarian government, hopefully statesmen, right? We need more statesmen, not bloody politicians. And we need a long-term thinking. I wish it was coming from the people, but the people are so jaded and so behind the curve and so lethargic and so misinformed and so uneducated that they'll just go along with it anyway, right? That's where we come in. That's the fire that drives us to making sure we help people to keep ahead and stay ahead. But it's happening. We'll see what happens next, right? It's a crazy thing, but there we go. Right, to give all that structure, it's massive. I know it's every week I talk about it. It's massive. Geopolitics, macroeconomics, fundamental financial instruments, AI, blockchain, Bitcoin. I know it's a big topic, right? Of course it is. It's fun. It's fun, right? If you want to go drop shipping, e-commerce, and selling tea and selling muscle powder, go knock yourself out. But fundamentally, fix the money, fix the world. So the whole idea is you get a start with this, you get moving through the process, and you either can put up with it or you can't, right? We have hundreds and hundreds of people that we brought into this process over the past decade. And we've been through all sorts of things, and we're still going through all sorts of things. And most people give up at the first sign of trouble, right? Don't be that person. Be the person who, if there's something to manage and maintain it. Take out a judgment call on your own self and use it as a way to judge yourself on what you're really made of, and push that through without being destined to fortune, right? Without being overly biased. But at the end of the day, if you understand the fundamentals of everything I've been talking about today, you understand the need to get ahead off your own back. Nobody else is going to do it for you. Any use? We'll see you inside the academy.